So today we're going to be playing around with one of the absolutely just coolest softwares I've ever seen. So this is the ChatGPT AI, and we are basically going to be making it do some things. So here I have a list if you want to take a quick peek. So yeah, we're going to also, try to make it do some of my homework and pretty much anything else I would want it to do. So alright. Now let's get right into it, right down to the work. Now before we actually start working on what we need to do, we're gonna do what a normal human does on a daily basis, and that is procrastinate. So we're just gonna ask it a random question that we just want answered, before we get to the work, before we start doing the stuff that we're not sure we're capable of doing, but we always somehow figure it out in the end. So now it does take a little bit longer to generate the responses than when I tested it a few days ago. That is just because this thing has exploded and now everyone's playing with it and using it. So that's basically why it's a little bit slower. So I'm going to be cutting up this video a little bit. So basically, okay, we asked this, what should I eat to build muscle? A pretty normal generic question when you get into working out, for example. It's like, to build muscle, you should focus on eating a balanced diet. Complex carbohydrates, healthy fats. There's probably some protein powder in there somewhere. Again, healthy fats. I mean, what else could you ask for? So let's move on. Now we are going to ask it to make us a meal plan, and what's going to be very impressive here is that it's actually going to remember about what we talked about. So, we asked about, hey, what should I eat to build muscle? So now we're asking it to make a meal plan. It's not just going to make a random meal plan that a human or whoever should eat, but it's gonna, directly, it's gonna remember what we already talked about. So that's just really impressive. So let's see. Breakfast, 2 eggs, oatmeal, blueberries. This is just like the most generic bodybuilder diet I've ever. Grilled chicken, of course, quinoa, broccoli. So this is a pretty generic response. This is something that a normal bodybuilder in the gym would tell you, but super impressive. But now we are gonna ask it to do something quite a bit more complex. So we are just simply gonna ask it to make a nearest neighbor algorithm in Python. So this is sort of an exercise you would do when you are getting into machine learning. This is basically something that takes a large set of data, and then you basically put some more data into it, and then it will compare that input data to the data that it already had. And it's gonna be like, hey, this data that you just put in, it's kind of the most like this particular part right here. So that's basically what it does. And so the AI is just making our code now because it's just better than us, because it's a robot. So it has generated all of this beautiful code, and as you can see, it's also commented really well. Import the required libraries, define a function, create a nearest neighbor's object, and then it also describes the whole process. It takes a data set, a query point, and all that. So this is very cool, but now we are going to take it a step further. So this algorithm really isn't all that impressive because it's basically just importing this library. So that library basically already has, it's actually not that library, it's this one right here. So this library basically already has the functions implemented that you need to actually make this work. So basically it's just importing the library, and then it's just calling the functions, and you're just parsing in some variables pretty much. So really not all that impressive. So we are going to tell it to make this again, but now we are going to say without using any libraries. Okay, so this is a lot more complex because now all of the code that it's going to be generating, it's just going to have to write it itself. So this is this is pretty ridiculous. So this is something that you would get as an exercise to do in college, in computer science, for example, as sort of like one of the first introductionary exercises into machine learning. And as you can see, it's doing it, without any problems. It didn't need a few hours to figure out what nearest neighbors is. It didn't need any time to learn how to, program in Python. Well, obviously it did, but it just did that in the past, but it just remembers everything perfectly because it's just great, because It's a robot. So yeah, I mean, this code is great. You know, everything is also perfectly commented as well. It's using the Euclidean distance formula, which is the most common one. You could probably also tell it to be like, hey, do the Manhattan formula way as well, right? And it will probably do that just fine. But I mean, I think this is pretty impressive enough. So we are just gonna move on to something I asked it a few days ago, and it's something that I'm actually gonna be figuring out shortly in the next few days. So make me a SQL script that will generate 1,000 rows of random data and import them into a table. You know, so you know, there we go. Now, unfortunately, you can only write stuff to this AI. You can't actually be like, hey, here's my folder of Excel files, and here's like this database and that database. You know, so could you just like group all of this data together and just import it into that database? Thanks. You know, that so it can't do that yet because it also can't connect to the internet. But I mean, as you can see, it's still incredibly useful because it's just doing stuff, you know what I mean? And what's very interesting as well, it doesn't just give out the same responses every time you ask it a question. It actually gives out different answers. So for instance, I've asked it this question about two times in the past already, and it actually gave me a perfect answer. You know, it created a a script, whereas this really didn't. You know, like 1,000 rows of data, you're gonna need to be creating some sort of a loop or something like that that's gonna be importing in 1,000 rows. But here it just said, yeah, you know, just do it this way, and then just 3 dots for the rest, a few hundred rows of data. So you do get different responses, even though the question might be exactly the same. So this was not the best one, but we could just sort of run it again, or we could modify it a little bit. You know, maybe we'd be like, hey, you know, just loop this. You know, this is not great. But we are gonna move on to something that is also very crazy. So we are gonna tell it to write me a 1-minute video script summary of this article. So we are just gonna take this random article of a new Windows update. We are just gonna Control A and Control C everything, because we just can't be bothered to even go in and get, you know, the nice sections and everything. We're just gonna give it everything. You know, so we are just gonna throw this in, you know. So this is basically what I would usually do to make a video. You know, I get like an article or two, I read the article, I make sort of a 1-minute summary for my short videos, and then I also just freely, you know, talk about the article in the longer version of the video. So here we go. We got our video script. So let's see how this goes. So Microsoft has released its December 2022 patch Tuesday, fixing 2 zero-day vulnerabilities and a total of 49 flaws. So I can already see this is a little bit different than the last time I asked it to do this on the exact same article. And yeah, of the 49 vulnerabilities, 6 are classified as critical, allowing for remote code execution. The update includes fixes for 19 elevation of privilege vulnerabilities, and so on. It's a very good summary, you know what I mean? And if we just take this in a little bit of a different direction, let's say you're a writer, right? So you know, it can generate its own stories as well, but we are just gonna take an example that's more familiar to a lot of people. So write a short diary entry from Obi-Wan Kenobi right after he destroyed Darth Vader on Mustafar. So this is what happens at the end of Star Wars Episode 3. Now, what's really ridiculous to me as well is I asked it about something a lot more obscure as well. I asked it to make a diary entry from Gon, from an anime called Hunter x Hunter, right after he had a specific fight. And I mean, it's just crazy. It did a perfect diary entry, even though that's a lot less well known as Star Wars, for example. So let's see what it wrote. Dear Diary, today was a momentous day. And again, this is different than when I asked it the same question right before I started recording this video. So that's pretty crazy. I have finally defeated Darth Vader and put an end to his reign of terror. It was a hard-fought battle, but I was able to emerge victorious. As I stood over Vader's lifeless body, I felt a mix of emotions. Okay, so this is a little bit wrong because, you know, he wasn't dead, you know, he was pretty much screaming in pain. I was relieved that the threat was finally over, but I was also filled with sorrow. Vader was once my brother, Anakin, and it pains me to have had to end his life. But I know that it was the right thing to do. Anakin was consumed by the dark side and could not be saved. By destroying him, I have protected the galaxy from his destructive powers. I only hope that he has found peace in the afterlife. May the Force be with him. Obi-Wan. So this is very, very interesting. So before, I got a different response and it was wrong in a little bit of a different way. So here it made a little bit of a mistake as I stood over Vader's lifeless body. So that scene never really happened. I mean, maybe it happened in some sort of an obscure book or something like that, but it didn't really happen in the movies. It does, you know, he basically just walks away from Darth Vader, from Anakin, while he's basically burning to death, you know, so it doesn't really happen. And in the previous time I asked the exact same question, it also made another mistake, which was, it basically said like, hey, I hope he can be redeemed sometime in the future, which also didn't make sense because Obi-Wan thought he was dead. But I mean, either way, this is pretty ridiculous stuff. So it's gonna be interesting what is, you know, gonna be done with this in the future. There have been stories about people just telling the AI to, you know, write them like children's books and stuff like that. So they just get like a short story from here. They use another AI to generate images and they just slap it all together in a PDF and boom, you have an ebook that you can sell, I guess. I don't know exactly how the copyright works with this sort of stuff, but I mean, it's pretty ridiculous. So this is where I'm gonna wrap it up, and yeah, please follow the channel for more, and yeah, cool.